To Madame Raven's. This way to the library. She's been expecting you.
Urban Fae, Trekking Through Mundania, Part 1. Why, Robert, it's good to see you. With Sorsha away at school and Siobhan still living so far from home, I'd begun to feel lonely. Shane has finally completed his term of service. He's in town now, staying here with me, but very busy with his new job. Miss Ellie greeted me, at least as far as she knew. She did not know that I'd just completed a new glamour on her. I smiled down at her. It's good to see you too, Mrs. Gosling. This is my business associate, Mac Tyree. It's actually about Shane that we've come to visit, if you have a moment. I felt no shame in taking advantage of the glamour. This woman had always held at least a mild antipathy for me, despite the way her husband and daughter felt. Okay, stepdaughter. She didn't know that either, but may have felt it, with some kind of mother's radar. She had prayed against Sorsha and me, that we'd discard our beliefs and adhere to hers, and likely that I was just a passing bad boy phase for Sorsha, and it would soon be done. Besides, she was a mortal tool, and I started to become ruthless in that regard, what with my heart being encased in proverbial stone. She'd been attracted to Fae males, and I could see that she felt some interest in the big bad wolf even now, especially since the glamour aged him up a decade or two and closer to her age. At least she's consistent, I acknowledged. Tyree's glamour was the same we'd used to trick Sony and the company, but with more dignified attire. Mine was the same, a very nice designer suit, with just a little too much bling. She patted at my suit. You look so prosperous. Your hair is longer, but it looks nice. Come in and have some tea. I spoke with Shane this morning. He's really staying busy at the new company, the same old company to me since his father worked there as well. She kept up the chatter as she bustled about to prepare her specialty beverage. He's probably neck-deep in alligators even as we speak, she giggled. He likes that phrase. Must have picked it up in the service. Would you like to have leave of a message if you can call if you would likely have to leave a message if you called him. I always do. I thanked her and we settled in for tea and small talk. When we neared the bottoms of our cup, I caught her eyes in mine. I began to work another glamour. Grandfather would have been better at it, but I had to practice. This one was big. Sorsha and I had not finished our discussion on what memories to give her, so I went with the last option we'd considered. It was another delaying tactic. After several moments of concentration, which left me a little drained and with a mild headache, she sat up straight and resumed her chatter. Siobhan has gone on a cruise. After she broke up with the Hearn boy, she didn't have a date for a while. So it's a single cruise. It's 10 days, so maybe she'll meet someone. Oh, here's Shane's phone number. He was so glad to get to know you. I'm sure he'll be thrilled to hear from you. It certainly won't hurt to bring in a business contact this early in his career, Mr. Tyree. We said our goodbyes and mounted our valiant steeds. We'd left the chariots in Otherworld and had taken MB and another mount who had been happy to get free from the drudgery of the stables and give his master a lift. We rode side by side. There was plenty of room, and we appeared to mortals as two men riding in an open-top sports car. In city traffic, Fae horses could manage to keep up with the most bumper-to-bumper flow or slow neighborhood speed limits. Tom's portal in the backyard led to Cat World, and it was not a place to visit today or any day without a specific invitation and escort. I ended up trying my hand at another temporary portal, like what Grandma Fithich had shown me. It sucked, and was small. It shuddered and dissolved as the last hair on MB's tail crossed. Apparently my grandmother had helped more than I realized on the earlier one. I decided to hold off on those until I had had more time to learn. Eventually I'd be able to do that swirl, I thought, with a tiny nudge of satisfaction. Had to be careful. I couldn't let myself be happy just yet. The encircling stone was solid and heavy, and I wanted to keep my heart that way in honor of my love. I'd visited this part of downtown a few times with various Fosters, but I didn't know much about it. The office complex was adjacent to a warehouse district. That, in turn, ran towards the port. It blended in well with every other set of buildings in the area, hidden in plain sight. I didn't want to put Shane over a barrel. I didn't know him well enough to like him, but Sorsha had fond feelings for her stepbrother and said that her father had regarded him as a true son, as far as he could with a mortal, fathered by one of his nominal enemies. We were going to take things from his company. He would be the introduction, but we'd do the dirty work when he was not present, and when we could shift the blame onto a criminal enterprise, ideally Serpentez. We discussed that we might even be able to let Shane be the one to discover the culprits. Though it would be far too late to recover the items, he would gain only a partial benefit. The operation was a hit, no surprise, since it had been Sorsha's brainchild. I know, I'm biased. I managed to glamour Shane with the same information as I had his mother regarding the now expired Siobhan. We parted as close friends and soon-to-be brothers-in-law in his mind. The stone shook mightily when I wove that part of the glamour. Tyree and I set a few more glamours on the management employees so that they would trust Shane when the time came. By the time we left the building, they had their eyes on him as a potential member of their management team. We didn't leave the business park. We moved on to Warehouse D. Once our filching was done, we raided Warehouse A. We left a trail of forged documents, false data entries, and glamored building supervisors. They had orders for a full-scale demonstration by the 4th of the month. It was currently Samhain Day, and my grandfather reminded me more than once that he had a feast to host before sundown in Otherworld. On this day, the timelines converged closely, and we had less room to adjust our moment of return. "Do I have to be on time for the feast?" I asked as we trotted back towards our portal. He looked at me askance. "No, it will look rude, but I am the critical component for a successful event. You are merely a co-host." I bowed. "I'm generally sorry, and do apologize for any rudeness, my lord, not just to you, but to the citizens of the realm. However, there is a personal matter to which I must attend, and I don't think I will be able to enjoy the event or rest until I've attempted it." "Well enough. Get home as soon as you can, my Baukchal. We need our chieftain in charge of nefarious plans and schemes, who has learned the mysterious ways of primitive Mundania." He watched for my reaction. He'd slipped in the part about chieftain, but I knew what it meant. I bowed again, with a greater sense of gravity and dignitas. "Mac Tirmor, I shall do my best to serve in the manner and deed, the honor I feel." I was now a chieftain of a Gaelic Western wolf clan, and only barely into adolescence by faith standards. I knew it was more than I deserved, certainly more than most received, but from that moment I truly dedicated myself to earning what had been bestowed. I hoped that I would be able to complete my side business before it got too late. Certain days of the year, the time in Otherworld and Mundania, flowed in mostly synchronized pathway. It was a long way, and we would need to be fresh when we arrived. But we'd gotten an early start on the day. He wasn't prepared to risk any more tail hairs until I'd practiced Portal some more. I told him about the mission on the way so that he could opt in or head home early, or maybe even await the outcome in case I wasn't able to return, and he could report my demise. He stopped and made a disgusting slobbering sound, then hiked a rear leg and cut loose with loud flatulence. At first I thought he had emphatically refused, and then it hit me he was offended by the notion that he would not be willing to assist me in my endeavor. "I'm sorry, my too brave friend. I don't doubt your courage, nor your loyalty. However, I have in mind that you would act as bait, and thought it might be beneath your dignity. You are, after all, a notorious warhorse after your recent deeds." He whickered and then snorted out a laugh. I would have to interpret those sounds on my own, but I knew that he was willing and capable of performing any reasonable task. Knowing MB, he'd probably take on unreasonable tasks as well. We arrived as the sun was setting over the little park. The pedestrian bridge was rarely used since the place was poorly tended, and the current climate of criminality run amok. It had been virtually abandoned. The city had indeed begun to suffer in all of its environs, and to decay with the warring factions causing fear and reticence on behalf of municipal officials, public servants, and the public in general. The canal water that flowed under the little bridge reeked worse than ever, like troll dung and urban litter. I switched MB's glamour to a high-dollar, mighty bike like the one I'd lost. It wouldn't deceive old Grendel Stoneskin. He'd definitely come out to snack on some equine delight, but it was fun nostalgia for me, and would prevent anyone who dared the bridge to ignore MB. I slid off before we reached the edge. The trees ensured the sun was effectively down, though I could still see an orange-red ball like an overripe grapefruit perched over one of the lower buildings on the horizon. The effect was weird, and I found that we were in the shadows, while in the world around us, a small measure of natural light remained. MB slowed his pace and plopped loudly on the pavement as he continued forward, riderless. I hastened down the steep trail that led down to the water. I carried the 3 javelins from MB's saddle holster. They'd do nicely. They wouldn't penetrate the hide, but if they were well aimed, I might be able to survive while inflicting some damage. The big bad wolf had struggled to take out a troll by himself in full sheer tower. I figured MB to be at least as reliable an ally as I'd been for grandfather as a newly turned werewolf. At least MB wouldn't have to deal with suddenly being a quadruped. He was used to it. I paused before I reached the bottom. Due to my nature, I was aware of air currents that would best keep my scent from the beast for as long as possible. He needed to smell only horse until I was in place. MB, helpful as always, cut loose with another effulgent bout of gas. I wondered briefly what he'd eaten at the Samhain feast. The nose and odor delivered our boy. An eye lit in the deep gloom under the bridge. The monster slid stealthily from its lair and reached up to snatch the meal that now passed over his bridge so boldly. It had apparently learned from our first encounter, in which was unable to bend its elbows while standing, despite its height and arm length. This time it first grasped the bridge, then levered itself up a little. I had taught a lesson, after all. It had cost the thing only one of its eyes. Once both meat hooks were engaged, I ran forward. I didn't throw my first javelin. Instead, I thrust it upward into the groin that was nicely exposed, as the troll bent one leg upward to help himself stretch and reach, while the other was extended completely and supported by only the toes on slippery stones. When the javelin struck home, it immediately inhaled with the sound of 100 sousaphones. After I'd sunk the weapon into the target, I kept going to the other side of the creek to hopefully confuse my opponent. I had expected it to whirl and face me, but I couldn't tell I'd struck a nerve that caused a pause. Whatever it sported under the dirty rags around its waist, I had poked or raked. The javelin's leaf-shaped blade held firm, and I was forced to release it. The shaft presently swung back and forth between the thing's legs like some absurd additional appendage. I'd climbed desperately, not with the intent to escape, just to gain a little height. The monster wailed with the torture to its softer, more sensitive parts. It sounded like a freight train roaring over the small span. It squalled some and then plucked the offending weapon from wherever it had been lodged. The thing sniffed at it, glared at it, then snapped it into several pieces. I'd seen some sort of gunk on the end and hopefully flesh to go with the gore. Then it caught my scent. I'd moved to its upwind side. The thing moved faster than I'd ever had previously. I'd worked to develop my own reaction speed, and in this instance, I awaited only a target. Our moves were nearly simultaneous. I experienced some time dilation due to fear and stress. The boulder-sized fist that drove for me came closer than I liked to consider, to render me a jellied mass stuck to the side of a reeking bridge. I jumped upwards, even as the knuckles impacted the soft dirt on the bank, and sank in several feet. My second javelin, meantime, had found its mark. I had only left one, then it would be short sword and claw, not ideal for an opponent of that size. The missile I'd just cast was now lodged deep in the throat of the bellowing monster. It may have even struck its cervical spine, if it had one. What goes up must come down, a law of nature in this world, if not in all of them. I landed on Grendel's wannabe stony arm. Once I'd balanced, 2 steps took me to its shoulder, and I lunged in with pig sticker number 3. As when I'd cast stones during our second encounter, I aimed for the blind socket rather than the good eye. The arm withdrew much more slowly than it had gone forward. Apparently sinking it in the mud had caused the ground to seize the appendage in the earth's grasp, as though she herself was offended that this ungainly beast would strike her. It still shifted pretty rapidly, and the arm was removed from under my feet. I was left dangling from the shaft of the short spear, where it was buried in the eye socket, clearly still short of the brain. Just how thick is his skull? I wondered desperately. I tried to set my feet on the massive chest, but the thing turned and leaned back against the bridge, seeking its own leverage. The paw that was not covered in muck scrabbled to reach me as the walls and bellows morphed into roars of rage. The roar then morphed into a choking squeak. Perhaps I've hit something useful after all. I grinned savagely. I shifted my grip on the javelin shaft and used my toes to find the end of the other in its throat. The hand that had started to reach for me shifted to brush me upward and claw at the object that now obstructed its breathing. I used the opportunity to plant my feet on its shoulder and then spring over the rail of the bridge. MB was there waiting, and I hopped atop my valiant steed. We rode to the far end of the bridge, then turned to watch the fun. The bridge troll was on its knees and coughed and clutched at the objects that wounded it so badly. I felt no pity for the thing. It wasn't evil, it just did what it did. Unfortunately, it had set its sights on me, and likely on other passer-bys. However, it had been a noteworthy opponent, and thought it deserved to die quickly. In fact, I wasn't sure that it would die from the current injuries, and I needed to finish it. Once more I slid from my mount and walked towards the trail that led down to the water on this side. MB neighed in protest. He probably thought I failed at being ruthless to my enemy, and was wise enough to understand that a wounded troll was much more dangerous than a merely peckish one. I had one more trick to play. I stopped just above the massive, muddy divot in the ground and fished inside the pocket of my great plaid. I took hold of one of the two objects. The monster had succeeded in removing the javelin from its throat. It now plucked the one from its empty eye socket. I whistled softly, and it turned its ugly mug to stare at me. I could tell it was about to spring when I fired the pistol. It was a straight angle, and something finally found the thing's brain, maybe along the tunnel that the javelin had opened. It still took a moment for the monster to register that it was dead. It was pretty stupid. I sprinted back up to the embankment as soon as I'd fired. By the time I'd mounted and looked back, the first serious Fey enemy of my career had crumbled into several large boulders that slowed the flow of water from under the bridge. There was no head remaining for me to start the collection for my haul. Only a nice foam and gurgle added to the otherwise unpleasant stream. You vanquished your troll, the one that has vexed you since you first became aware of the wider world. I'm happy for you, the Macticmere rumbled at my shoulder. You even managed to make it to the feast without undue delay. There were some rumbling comments when you failed to appear, but I think if we announced your achievement, it will reverse any discord you may have caused by your discourtesy. After that, we must award some rings and lands to particularly valiant before we ask them to rest to go forth to fight once more. Reputation has far more value in Otherworld than any other treasure, regardless of origin world or realm of affiliation. All I could do was nod. He was right, but my stony heart led me to thoughts of my love and our plight. He called the assembly to order, then explained the personal mission I had completed after starting it last year. Those faces that had looked either stoic or disdainful in my direction at the start of his narration transformed into portraits of approbation and approval. They cheered. I bowed to them, and pretended to care what they thought. We handed out some rings and other treasures, to include a few that MB and I found under the troll bridge, and grandfather offered land to a few. The evening finished with good cheer, and satisfied folk went to their beds, eager to prepare for our next venture. Once everything was settled that evening, I called Juan and Maria to my private chamber. We were both very brave, facing down the serpent man. Did you recognize who he was? The usually timid Maria was first to answer. He was a Quetzal demon, evil and hungry, a child of Santa Muerta and the old gods. She waved her hands and crossed herself to protect her soul. I nodded. Close enough. He is very powerful. He wants the two of you to die. He felt cheated when his priests failed to sacrifice you to his father. You were very brave, even when he approached you. Forgive me, Senor Lobo. Wolf. Juan performed something like a curtsy, and I withheld my laughter. He was trying so hard to adjust to his new surroundings. You said that you would protect us, and you did. We had no reason to be afraid. I was a little, but I knew that you would keep your word. I beckoned for them to have a seat and poured them some very nice wine. I feel that you should know more now that you have observed as I instructed. Let's start with the beaker from which I poured the wine. You may have noticed that no one ever seems to fill it, yet it's never empty. The same is true of cauldrons and bread baskets in the kitchen. They're always full because it's their nature. In your quarters, there will never be any dust. It's taken care of by dust devils. They are translucent, flying beings, and they love to eat minute dust mites and particles. We leave out small dishes of water for them, sometimes milk or porridge. It's thirsty work, eating grains of dust and mold. At the look of horror on Maria's face, I added, They are not devils in the evil sense. It's just a name for them in this world. If you get lonely, you may speak to them. They won't answer, but many of us believe that they do listen. Don't kill spiders inside the buildings or on the grounds, anywhere, unless they attack. The ones here won't bite you, and you'll notice that they keep their webs very tidy. No hanging dust bunnies or unwound insect carcasses. In fact, avoid harming any creature, great or small, until you have observed it. Almost all have functions. The Fae are more than ancient, and we have directed the growing of many living things. They are helpful and may make otherworld living seem like magic. It is not magic or spell casting, but nature. If you want duties, we can find some for you, but otherwise, you're free to explore and learn. If you like music, there's no better teachers. The same may be said of any other skill or pastime. Those who serve do so because they love what they do, who they get to be, and the ones in whose household they wish to be. It is not so in other places, other realms, providences, and worlds, but that is the way of it is in Caer Mactir. I gifted them the pistols I'd carried since the last engagement with mortal turds. There is only one round in each weapon. Here in Otherworld, they will only fire once and then become useless forever, even if they return to Mundania. They are very powerful, so use them only in extremes, if your lives are in danger. You are welcome to take up arms while you are here, but these are special. We may have to fight off an invasion before it's all over. Careful where you point them, and keep your fingers off the trigger, unless you are ready to kill. We spoke a little more, but they'd had a long night, and while the day had been easy, they needed to get some sleep and reset their circadian rhythms. As far as that went, so did I. I'd been up for a long time, and busy besides. I had washed briefly upon my return, and Fae clothing. Well, it was self-cleaning, and even self-repairing to some degree. Still, I needed a hot shower, and a good soak to clear my head. First thing in the morning, I would go on check on Sorsha. I'd had word that she was healing rapidly now, and she was back in Otherworld, among her mother's folk. Yet I needed to see her, to know for myself. I needed to tell her so much. So I rose before dawn and set out for the realm of the Western Gaelic Sea Clan. The chief and the chiefess welcomed me warmly enough. They understood better than I the process that had taken my love, yet left her alive. They also understood the hopelessness for us as a couple, now that Sorsha's transmutation was permanent. Sorsha would not be allowed to become a Fae lady in anthro form. The horror was that she was still alive. But I couldn't live in the sea, and she couldn't stay in a fort. In any case, we could not be together as a couple, in such disparate forms. I wasn't ready for a final goodbye, and I was sure that she was not either. I saw that we would likely drift apart over time, and held back my grief, contained it within the stone. She needed to see strength, like she'd shown through all of this. Besides, she'd saved my life. I owed her something, not a mere arm ring, but something substantial, like a shoreline. More importantly, I still loved the soul that resided within her pinepted form. She would always have that. What we said doesn't really matter, nor was it anyone's business but ours. She was definitely better, still bald in large patches, but her skin was mostly healed. She was proud about my victory over the bridge troll. She even bark-laughed about MB being a little jealous of what I found, my old bike in the troll's lair. I assuaged his outright by leaving the bike by the donations bin where I'd so long ago borrowed some clothing. I held her for a long time before I tore myself away and left to resume my duties. I promised to see her soon as we came back, and I could tear myself away from the others. She clapped her flippers and flopped back into the surf, with only a little splash to mark her presence. So quoth this raven. Thank you so kindly for stopping by my chateau, my darlings. It does mean so much to me. Please, if you have not subscribed, as many of you have not, please do so. Give me a like so I know what you would like to hear. And comment. I always love to read your comments. And special thanks to my Patreon and membership supporters. Ciao, darlings.